I believe in God. I believe in destiny. Not destiny in the sense of all of our actions being predetermined, but destiny in the sense of our ability to choose.
The 1999 film The Matrix, written and directed by the Wachowski sisters, transgender women Lana and Lily Wachowski, who were previously known collectively as the Wachowski brothers, is a mind-bending science fiction action film about questioning the nature of reality and identity. It is a rebellious cyberpunk stand against the stifling and oppressive mediocrity of everyday life, as typified by the white-collar business environment, but which might be more broadly applicable to the white cis-hetero-capitalist patriarchy. That extrapolation might come across as bizarre to some people who just see a violent, male-centric action film with a bunch of flashy effects, but The Matrix is far more than what is evident on the surface.
What is The Matrix?
The Matrix is a film with layers, both in terms of its literal plot and its thematic meaning. The plot involves the discovery that what we think of as our reality is just a computer simulation, and that there is a real world that is a dark dystopia that no one wants to recognize because it's just too horrible to realize. The plot invites contemplation of what reality is. Thematically, there are two levels of meaning. First, the basic reading about merging Western and Eastern religious philosophies to answer the question of what is reality, and then there's the level that most people missed for a long time because the world lacked an important piece of information, that the creators are transgender, and it's probably about the Wachowskis' experiences as transgender women. In recent years, this film that had already gone extensive thematic analysis has been re-examined as a heavily coded transgender narrative, and that gives it a motherlode of feminist value beneath the surface. It took a while for either Wachowski to make it clear that it was their authorial intent, but on August 4th, 2020, Lily Wachowski came out and made it explicit that it originally was intended as a trans narrative.
I'm glad that it has gotten out that, that was the original intention, but the world wasn't quite ready at a corporate level. The corporate world wasn't ready for it, so.
The movie starts with a few stylized production company logos, rendered in shaky green, like that of an old monochrome monitor, the signature style of the Matrix franchise. It starts things off with an off-putting theme of reality itself being altered and in question. When the title animation plays with strings of Matrix code, it creates the illusion of a crack in reality, allowing us to glimpse its true nature. We then see a computer's point of view as it tries to trace a call between two humans. This is rendered with a command line interface that has the word trans in the first string of text visible on screen. This is perfectly justifiable in context. Trans is a Unix term, but it subtextually starts off the film with a trans-centric framing. The Wachowskis had a history of this subtle transcoding that extends beyond The Matrix. In their 1996 thriller Bound, airline tickets with Trans Global on it, trans separated from global, with a nifty little hyphen, are displayed front and center. And in their first film, the 1995 action movie Assassins, an unseen character texts repeatedly about being a woman, and the twist is that a male friend thought dead turns out to be that character.
I've pretty much just been leaving a breadcrumb trail of gayness.
I see that now.
We see a ton of numbers, and the camera deep dives into a 0, and yeah, that looks kind of vaginal to me. As the computer works on the trace, we overhear a conversation between two human characters we'll come to know as Trinity, played by Carrie-Anne Moss, and Cypher, played by Joe Pantoliano, discussing someone named Morpheus, played by Lawrence Fishburne, believing that someone who they're studying is a figure called the One. Trinity recognizes that they're being spied on, and ends the communication. Considering that we'll learn that Cypher is less than trustworthy, his insistence that the line is secure, while Trinity senses danger, is apt foreshadowing for his face-heel turn. The framing shifts from the monochrome computer land to, well, we might be inclined to think of it as the real world, but it's as much of a computer land as the command line interface. White male cops break down a door labeled 303 to reveal Trinity at the console that she just used to communicate with Cypher. We get our first look at our female deuteragonist, and she immediately stands out as strange in her goth aesthetic, not quite fitting in with the setting. Initially, it's unclear if she's even a good guy or a bad guy. The Matrix has a lot of overt symbology, even alongside its deeper, subtler symbolism. The label of 303 is a pretty obvious reference to Trinity, whose name evokes the Holy Trinity of the Christian mythology. This is the shallow level of meaning, like that of the Matrix to the real world, while the deeper truth, that requires special knowledge to understand, what we might call the level in which the resistance is active, has the rebellious transgender meaning. In her goth aesthetic, Trinity is beautifully androgynous and stands out in contrast to the white cops defending the stifling status quo. She kills them by taking advantage of the Matrix's limited physics engine and performs superhuman feats, which one might call supernatural on the shallow level of meaning, and one might also call subversion of the status quo with her strangeness, her queerness, on the deeper level. Despite the Matrix ostensibly being the real world, its appearance is surreal with exaggerated noir aesthetics. Even without knowing that it's supposed to be a simulation, viewers can understand that something is off. It's fake. A bunch of goons that look like federal agents, white men in suits, show up and throw their weight around, clashing with the white male cops. On the shallow level, the details of their race and gender are incidental, just traits of what default characters look like in racist, sexist Hollywood. I can understand why no one found the details relevant to past analysis. However, on the deeper level, it is relevant to the theme of subverting the status quo. These white men are its arbiters, and they engage in petty posturing that makes them all look pretty pathetic, while we respect Trinity as the only one in the scene who is framed as a legitimate character. A cop disrespects Trinity as a weak girl, while the agents know her true power. There is a bit of a class element where the lower class cops are seen as less intelligent than the suits. On the shallow level, this is used to make a straightforward feminist sentiment. An unlikable antagonist is sexist, but he underestimates her, while the main upper-class antagonist, Agent Smith, played by Hugo Weaving, recognizes her power. Many feminists would roll their eyes at this attempt at a feminist sentiment because of its juxtaposition, with Trinity looking outrageously sexy in her form-fitting leather ensemble. And there has been a general reaction of, "Nice try, you bunch of dudes," but it's clear you just want to ogle her. However, with the knowledge that the Wachowskis are women, and hid symbolism in the film, we can derive greater nuance from her sexualized appearance. I interpret Trinity as symbolic of a trans woman who has fully transitioned into the womanly form and gender role. As such, her overt sexuality would have greater legitimacy as a form of self-expression that subverts the status quo, similar to the cisgender lesbian love interest character Corky in Bound. In that context, her form-fitting leather ensemble is evocative of the Leatherdyke subculture, as much a part of queer culture as Corky's Lapras tattoo. We can imagine that the Wachowskis actively empathized with her and used her as an expression of themselves as much as any of the characters. Of course, on the shallow level, her badassery is pretty fun to watch just on its own. An effective female fighter with sex appeal might be simplistic as far as feminist characters go, but it still has some value. Right off the bat, the film presents us with what is effectively a female superhero we can all root for. This was way before literal female superhero movies of quality, like 2017's Wonder Woman and 2019's Captain Marvel, and even before 2000's X-Men gave us Jean Grey. Before Trinity, we had female action heroes like Ellen Ripley in the Alien films, and Batgirl and Batman and Robin, but not much to boast in the way of superhuman fighters. A lot of female viewers loved Trinity for this reason, and that gives her character basic feminist value. The bullet time action stunts, involving the 360-degree camera room, are one of the things that the film is most remembered for. Contrary to popular belief, it wasn't the first film to use it. Lost in Space used it the year before in 1998 to illustrate a ship moving at faster-than-light speeds. However, The Matrix made it iconic by using it repeatedly to enhance its action scenes, by giving more detail, somewhat of a surreal aspect to indicate that they're in a simulation, and illustrating the characters moving in superhuman ways. It has basic feminist value that its first use is here with Trinity to build her up as a superhuman fighter, instead of waiting to use it for Neo, fully realizing his powers at the climax. Until Morpheus' appearance, Trinity is the face of these superhuman rebels. Trinity calls Morpheus to update him, and he tells her to go to a different exit. We don't yet know what this means, but it's understood as an essential goal, and he warns her about the agents. She takes off, literally running away from Agent Smith.
Generally speaking, when scary things get scared, not good.
She leads him and the cops in a chase over the rooftops, executing a superhuman jump across a large gap. The cops can't follow, but Agent Smith does easily.
Superhero landing! Yeah, that's really hard on your knees.
She does another superhuman jump and hurries to the exit, a phone booth with a ringing phone. She answers just as Smith's truck plows into the booth and vanishes. Sent as data out of the Matrix and into her human body. The agents discuss what they've learned, that the rebels are going to try to convert a man named Neo, and that they must find him. Neo means new, and is also an anagram of one, both of which mean that Neo is something new that the agents haven't accounted for, and has the potential to destroy them. On the deeper level, the rebels trying to acquire Neo has the subtext of a bunch of trans people trying to get a trans woman to realize that she is trans, while the agents are arbiters of the status quo, trying to quash these efforts. The movie then segues into the story of Neo, played by Keanu Reeves, and his self-actualization. Similar to Trinity being made up to look a bit androgynous, by way of playing up masculinity, he is made up to emphasize femininity, and achieves a similar androgyny. Living in apartment 101, hint hint, he's a brilliant hacker loner who feels like the whole world is off in some unexplainable way. He is obsessed with a conspiracy theory or religious concept called the Matrix that is rumored to hold the answer. So amid his rebellious hacker stunts, he tries to track down Morpheus, who is rumored to be able to answer the question of,
What is the Matrix?
well, I don't know. Let's consult a dictionary. Let's see. Matrix. Noun. An environment or material in which something develops. A surrounding medium or structure. Derivative of the late Latin matrix, meaning womb or uterus. It's a metaphor for the way that the Matrix keeps people from growing up, kept in a fetal-like state, but also, Neo is literally obsessed with the concept of female genitalia, and the film might as well be called The Vagina.
Whoa.
Trinity hacks his computer and gives him the message that the Matrix has him. The vagina has him. And tells him to follow the white rabbit, shortly before some people show up at his door, one of whom has a white rabbit tattoo. This is the first of many references to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, a story written as a fantastic satire for 1865 children, but also beloved by modern recreational drug enthusiasts for its supposed allusions to the mind-bending sense of enlightenment that the world is false and obeys its own rules, bestowed upon users of certain drugs like LSD. The film pays homage to this interpretation with the use of red pills to induce trippy awakening from the illusion of the Matrix. On the deeper level, it's notable that this framing casts Neo in the role of Alice, a young girl. Neo does an illegal hacking service for this guy, Choi, who praises him as his own personal Jesus Christ. This signals the simplest thematic meaning, a retelling of the story of Jesus and his apostles. Neo as the One is the Savior, Trinity is more or less the Holy Spirit, Cypher is Judas, and Agent Smith is Pontius Pilate, though in the sequels he's more like Satan. However, there are other levels of meaning than the Christian one, which I personally find the least interesting, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Choi's conversation with Neo is largely composed of nods to theme and foreshadowing. It's also possibly intended to be something that we would consider a pass for the racial Bechdel test, in which two named characters of color talk about something other than a white character. As Choi's name implies, he was written as Chinese. For whatever reason, he was cast with a white actor, possibly because the Wachowskis didn't have enough sway with producer Joel Silver at that point. Once The Matrix was a success, they notably filled the sequels with Black and Asian characters. And yeah, it's kinda hard to tell, but Neo might be supposed to be a man of color. Keanu Reeves is often interpreted as a white man, which he is only in part. In addition to white, he is of Chinese and Native Hawaiian descent. In 2019, he even took a role in the Asian American-centric rom-com, Always Be My Maybe. His white passing privilege probably accounts for The Matrix's widespread success. But Neo, as a character whose race is never discussed, is technically a character of color, inherited from the actor. I also suspect that his casting as an actor of color was intentional by the Wachowskis to bring another level of thematic meaning about a character of color rebelling against institutional racism. But this may be simply my own take on the matter. Before hiring Keanu Reeves, the Wachowskis solicited Will Smith to play Neo. He turned it down to accept the lead role in Wild Wild West. But we can imagine the film being much more overt in its anti-racist themes if he had accepted. The film borrows a lot of aesthetic from 1998's Blade, itself derivative of 1971's Shaft. And The Matrix would have been much more recognizable as a successor to that, with a black lead. Its racial politics certainly would have been more overt. Neo follows the white rabbit tattooed lady to go to party at a BDSM nightclub, represented by the Real World Hellfire Club in Sydney, Australia. The extras are literal customers of that club who just wanted to be in the film. When Trinity shows up there in her black leather, she looks like she belongs, and is thereby thematically associated with the leather, or leather dyke, subculture. She introduces herself to Neo, who knows her by reputation as a big-time hacktivist, who pulled up an incredible rebellious stunt against the IRS, essentially making her a Robin Hood figure. He's a big fan, but confesses that he didn't realize that she was female.
I just thought, you were a guy.
Most guys do.
On the shallow level, this has basic feminist value as a commentary on sexist assumptions that big names in tech would be male by default. It characterizes Trinity as a bit of a feminist and opposing hacker sexism. Her reference to most guys makes a dig at men of their community, and implies that hacker women know not to make these sexist assumptions. On the deeper level, of course, there's the implication that Trinity is subtextually a trans woman. The song blasting in the background is Rob Zombie's Dragula, a reference to the dragster featured in The Munsters. In context, it may be a reference to drag performance, as with the pun of RuPaul's Drag Race. Trinity warns him that malicious agents are out to get him, and effectively seduces him with the promise of knowledge like a siren. She moves intimately close and appeals to his deep sense of yearning, not for sex, but for an answer to the question,
What is the Matrix?
She represents Morpheus, who has the answer, and she relates to Neo as another person who once suffered out of yearning for the answer, and she guides him to his destiny as a student of Morpheus, who can find enlightenment in his teachings. It's similar to other sexualized calls to adventure, like Mirage from 2004's The Incredibles, or Helga from 2001's Atlantis: The Lost Empire. And a lot of feminist critics have disparaged this use of Trinity as a sexy lure. While a familiar trope, I think the Wachowskis' lack of a true male gaze imbues it with more nuance. Trinity is sexy as a person, and is dressed for partying, but she isn't framed in an excessively erotic manner. Her seductive poses are simply intimate through proximity and her manner of speech, which teases philosophical enlightenment in a seductive way, but does not involve any overt sexuality. It is simply how women have interpreted the sexy call to adventure, and it is more feminist than the male takes on the trope. On the deeper level, it sounds like Morpheus made Trinity realize that she was a trans woman, and she now extends an invitation to Neo to help him, or her, realize that same truth.
What is the Matrix?
It is a label given to that sense that the whole world and your sense of identity are wrong. That you have been lied to your entire life about these essential truths. It is an effective metaphor for gender dysphoria. After that exciting time with Trinity, where Neo is free to be himself, his alarm jolts him out of bed, and he goes to his day job at an office building, where he does degrading drudgery for a soulless corporation. He is unable to dress himself how he likes, being forced to wear a suit, and his chosen name of Neo is stripped from him, while he is forced to use his boring legal name of Thomas Anderson. His boss humiliates him with his legal name, calling him Mr. Anderson, and tells him that he isn't special and has to follow the rules just like everyone else. The color cast here is a god-awful, sickly blue-green that effectively illustrates to the viewers just how stifling and uncomfortable Neo finds his work environment. The scene creates an antagonistic portrayal of the status quo, as embodied by the boss character, that Neo will fight against for the rest of the film. It defines the cyberpunk struggle of Neo to be respected as an individual who has the power to break all the stifling rules of society and be free from them. The association of the antagonism of the status quo with an office work environment brings a general anti-capitalist theme to the table. On the deeper level, Neo as a trans woman feels gender dysphoria in the stifling role as a man, trapped in stereotypical male garments and forced to answer to a male name. She wants to be free to define herself as she wishes. The boss presents Neo with a choice: show up on time or get another job. This is not the choice that Neo wants to hear. Both options are bad. They both lead to the same stifling work environment. He says he'll shape up, but he doesn't really care one way or the other. It's all just what a capitalist society tells him he needs to do to survive. A postal worker brings Neo a package, asking if he's Thomas Anderson. Neo answers yes, but looks tortured as he forces it out. On a shallow level, it's a basic issue of individuality versus a corporatist system that just views him as a cog in the machine. On the deeper level, trans Neo hates being associated with the male persona forced on her by a cis-sexist society. In modern slang, since 2012, trans people refer to their legal names that represent the wrong gender as dead names, representing a persona that isn't really them, but will be how the transphobic society will remember them after they die. Calling a trans person by their dead name is considered a bitter insult, possibly inducing gender dysphoria if alive to hear it. The postal worker just unwittingly dead-named Neo, and she responded with discomfort, as fits a dead-named trans person. The package contains a cell phone, which rings as soon as he grabs it. Morpheus is on the other end. He warns Neo that the agents are there for him, and helps guide him towards safety. However, he doesn't take the leap of faith that requires him to make a precarious step on a ledge, and allows the agents to take him. Agent Smith interrogates him. Smith is a self-aware computer program, and acts like he doesn't quite belong in a human body, and hates every second of it. When his job forces him to speak to Neo, he can't help but display pure hatred and contempt. It's effective in the shallow thematic meaning of him as Pontius Pilate, and also in the deeper subtext of him as both the mouthpiece of cis-sexism and a racist white cop harassing a person of color, as would be more overt if Neo were played by Will Smith. In the shallow white passing level of meaning, it's an indistinct nod to general government corruption as opposed to abusive white cops harassing a man of color. Smith describes Neo as leading two lives: the respectable Thomas Anderson, and the rebellious Neo. He threatens prison by describing Neo's rebellious behavior, and uses the address of Mr. Anderson to claw at Neo's sense of identity with the name that he hates. After scaring him a bit, Smith tells him that they want his help to locate Morpheus, who they describe as an extremely dangerous terrorist. Oh man, the Wachowskis were lucky in their timing. Only a few years later, and Morpheus would necessarily be compared to Bin Laden, and would be really hard to make sympathetic. Neo knows his Miranda rights and demands a phone call, which isn't actually a right. He has a right to legal representation, and that sometimes entails calling a lawyer, but the one phone call thing is just on TV. Still, it makes for a fun subversion of authority. Again, it would be more effective with Will Smith standing up to the white cop. But Keanu Reeves does well enough. Smith says that a phone call would do him no good, and reprograms Neo's avatar to erase his mouth. It can be surmised to have a basic meaning of erasing the ability of minorities to express themselves in a white cis-sexist system. The agents then attack him by inserting an animated machine into his body. Before it breaks free of its gel coating, the machine looks like a sperm. The assault may represent cis-sexism, forcing masculinity on trans women, or may more overtly represent rape, when it burrows into his navel, like a penis entering a vagina. This probable yonic symbolism further serves Neo's androgyny. Neo wakes, as if from a bad dream, but he is still in the nightmare that is the Matrix. Morpheus calls him, tells him that he is the One, and gives him a location to meet. He is picked up by Trinity and two other rebels, Apoc, played by Maori actor Julian Arahanga, and Switch, played by Belinda McClory. The name Apoc appears to be an allusion to the word apocalypse, which formally means revelation, in addition to meaning the end of the world, not to mention sounding like epoch. Switch is overtly androgynous, described in the shooting script as beautifully so. Originally, the Wachowskis wanted the character to be female in the Matrix, but male in the real world, possibly representing a non-binary person, but Warner Brothers quashed that early in production.
We had the character of Switch, who was like a character who would be, a man in the real world, and then a woman in the Matrix, and, that's both were where our headspaces were.
On a shallow level, there is a basic feminist value in her as a woman subverting gender roles and acting as an aggressive enforcer-type goon, a role that was framed as an absurd joke in 1999's The Last Man on Planet Earth, while Apoc as the man is only a simple driver. Trinity notes that the agents bugged Neo and removes the tracking device before taking him to meet Morpheus. He sits him down in front of a table with a glass of water and compares him to the character of Alice from Alice in Wonderland.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole?
Again, trans symbolism in saying that an apparent man feels like a girl, even a specific character in a specific situation.
I can see it in your eyes.
Morpheus describes the yearning to know what the Matrix is that brought Neo here, how the knowledge that something is wrong about the world gnaws at him. He means a computer simulation, but could be talking about white supremacy and institutional racism, or gender dysphoria and cissexism.
Like a splinter in your mind.
He starts to explain the nature of the Matrix, describing it as keeping Neo from realizing the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo.
This would be much more impactful if Neo were played by Will Smith. A black man being told that he is a slave and is being kept enslaved by a bunch of aggressive white men in suits is so much more potent than the same thing being told to an Asian man that everyone mistook for a white man. On the shallow, white passing level, it has a similar sort of problem as shows centered on Roman slavery, with slaves played by white people, where you have center-focused drama from white people being subjected to the horrors of slavery that were subjected on black people in recent American history. In his relatively subordinate narrative function compared to Neo, the protagonist, Morpheus takes a standard supporting role as a black man to an apparent white lead, who appropriates a black struggle in a fantasy context to make it palatable for white audiences. It all could have been fixed if Will Smith had taken the role. According to Smith, the Wachowskis apparently wanted precisely one black male character in the movie and only hired Lawrence Fishburne to play Morpheus when Smith turned down the role of Neo. They previously wanted Val Kilmer or Sean Connery for the role of Morpheus, but both turned it down. White Morpheus telling black Neo he is a slave would be a bit awkward, but it would at least position the white character in a subordinate position to the black character, similar to Schultz in 2012's Django Unchained. Neo's boss offered him a bad choice, each option equally stifling. Then Agent Smith offered him another bad choice. Help him catch Morpheus and lose a chance to learn the truth, or go to prison. Now, Morpheus finally gives him a choice he wants. To see what the Matrix is and be exposed to danger, or to return home and be safe, but never learn the truth. In what may be an allusion to Jefferson Airplane's 1967 Alice in Wonderland-inspired druggy song, White Rabbit, he offers this choice in concrete terms, with colored pills. Take the blue pill and you're safe, but can't know the truth, or take the red pill,
and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
On the deeper level, the blue pill is likely an allusion to Prozac, an antidepressant. Many trans people who fail to recognize their own gender identity and seek self-actualization would end up taking antidepressants as a clunky stopgap solution for their deep discomfort about themselves and the world. Depression is only a symptom of gender dysphoria, which needs to be targeted directly by transitioning. In the 1990s, the main drug that a trans woman would take to begin her transition would be Premarin, an estrogen drug delivered in a red pill. That's right, the red pill, that famous rhetorical device of internet misogynists, is actually an allusion to a trans woman taking estrogen. If you've somehow gone on without becoming aware of what the concept of taking the red pill has mutated into, wow, you're lucky. The idea is, like Neo becoming aware of the Matrix, misogynists become aware that evil feminist women run the world, keeping them stifled in environments where they can't sexually harass coworkers or abuse their girlfriends, and that they need to harass women off the internet and support conservative politics to fight back against the evil feminist women that oppress them. Yeah, sending rape threats to everyone with a female avatar is exactly like Neo fighting Agent Smith. Nailed it! Needless to say, modern red pill misogyny has nothing to do with the original film, but this unfortunate legacy has poisoned the imagery for many feminists, making them disinclined to watch the film again. The film has even been written about as the worst American science fiction film for its influence on real-world gender politics, with many people wishing that it had never been made at all. However, whether or not we count the transgender subtext to the pills, there is a basic feminist value in the treatment of characters like Trinity and Switch that makes the retroactive demonization of the film for featuring the red pill in a positive light, long before the imagery was used to bolster misogyny, more than a little unfair. Neo thinks about it and then reaches for the red pill. We see Neo's reflection in Morpheus's glasses, divided into the two sides, with each of the pills representing his two lives. Morpheus offers the truth, and Neo looks at Morpheus and sees himself in two different forms, the side longing for truth winning out. This is the first of several instances of Neo staring at his own reflection, like he's examining himself. On the shallow level, it's about him realizing that he is the one. On the deeper level, trans Neo is realizing that she's a woman. The rebels get him ready to wake up by sitting him in front of a cracked mirror. Neo overtly looks at his split reflection, which magically fixes itself as the red pill starts to take effect. He can now clearly see himself, or herself. Cypher again compares him to a female character, this time Dorothy Gale from Wizard of Oz.
Means buckle your seatbelt, Dorothy, because Kansas is going bye-bye.
Again, it's phrased in an unusually queer way, with Cypher directly addressing Neo with a female name. It's subtle enough to go over the heads of cishet viewers, while standing out to queer viewers.
Nothing goes over my head. My reflexes are too fast. I would catch it.
Neo reaches out to the mirror and touches his reflection in more Wonderland imagery, like the proverbial looking glass that Alice enters. The mirror ripples and a bit of liquefied mirror gets on his hand. The mirror kind of looks like a Yonic symbol, and Neo basically fingers it. Anyone else see that? Not just me? There's an overt shot of his distorted reflection showing up in the liquid mirror as it horrifically attacks him, saturating him with his own ability to see himself. He then comes out of the Matrix, the womb, and emerges from a horrible cybernetic call into a Giger-esque sci-fi dystopia where humanity is kept in infantile forms, trapped in cells they don't know they're imprisoned inside, while monstrous machines feed on their energy outputs. On a shallow level, it's just a mind-bending twist, suggesting what we think of as the real world is just a dream, and the horrific reality would simply be there for entertainment value, weaving the philosophy into an engaging story. On the deeper level, there are a few underlying themes of note. Obviously, trans Neo just realized she's trans. However, what I find more interesting is the Marxist reading, where after dreaming in the stifling corporatist environment, Neo woke to see the truth of exploitation, where the authority structure is revealed to be a monstrous series of machines parasitically feeding on the population, who are kept ignorant as they work mindlessly for no other purpose than to support them. It fits with his boss calling him a cog in the machine, and it has thematic similarities to the strongly socialist 1927 film Metropolis, notable for having an early cinematic depiction of a robot. There is also relevance to the idea of a person of color becoming woke. realizing that white supremacy has instilled the world with institutional racism and other such injustices. It works well enough with Keanu Reeves, but we can imagine that reading would be pretty obvious to 1999 viewers if Will Smith had the role. The rebels collect him, taking him into a hovercraft, the Nebuchadnezzar. After some extensive recuperation, he meets the other apostles, crew, and Morpheus fills him in on the details of how the robot rebellion resulted in them enslaving humanity to feed on their electrical output after humans obscured the sun to keep them from accessing solar power. And yes, this breaks the laws of physics. You're not clever for pointing that out. The mini-matrix loading program that they run gives a chance to establish rules. Morpheus describes how its internal reality is generated by their brain's self-images, and that the things they sense are real in one way of looking at it, because it's caused by input in their brains, even if the physical world lacks those items. It's a mind screw, and it also fits in with the concept of gender identity. To your brain, it's real, even if it doesn't translate to your physical form.
What is real? How do you define real?
Neo is free, but not without scars of his captivity. He has gruesome cybernetic ports all over his body, as do most of the crew members. The exceptions are brothers Tank, played by Marcus Chong, and Dozer, played by Anthony Ray Parker, who were naturally born in the real world instead of being bred by machines. In the deeper meaning, the ports may reflect masculine features that trans women are unable to lose, while Tank and Dozer may represent cishet children of queer parents who are technically in the community, but don't relate to the experience of coming out and transitioning. Either way, the ports add to the theme of body horror that contributes to the theme of gender dysphoria. Morpheus trains Neo how to take advantage of the Matrix's physics engine to use superhuman abilities. Kung Fu expertise is downloaded into his mind, and they spar, practice giant jumps, and Neo is taught to always be on the lookout for agents. Morpheus gives fortune cookie advice about how to bend or break the rules that, in the deeper meaning, may be about breaking the rules of society or gender expression. However, agents have greater mastery of the Matrix than any human, able to dodge bullets and kill anyone in their path. So Cypher tells Neo to always run. Unless, of course, he is in fact the one. But what are the odds of that? Morpheus discusses how even though the people they are trying to save are the victims of the Matrix, they all act to support it and must be considered enemies until they can be saved. Any person without the proper protection that only a rebel has can be taken over by an agent and attack them. The way he describes this uses the phrase, the system, and can be applied in metaphor to any manner of struggles, from race to Marxist to transgender. Whatever your interpretation, once you understand that there is a deeper meaning, it can come across as profound. Unfortunately, it is that ambiguity that allowed the general metaphor to be co-opted by misogynists. The training program about agents has Morpheus pretend to take Neo to the actual Matrix and lead him down a busy city street. His attention is drawn by an attractive woman in a red dress smiling at him, which is a lure, so he drops his guard and misses her transforming into Agent Smith with a gun drawn. The scene is constructed carefully, with the sickly green color cast subtly applied to the background, and everyone but the woman dressed in drab colors, while her dress pops out of the sea of blandness, so the viewer's eye is drawn by her, just as Neo is, making the agent's appearance a shock to the audience as much as the character. Later on, Mouse, played by Matt Duran, takes credit for making her so sexy and explains that she's a sex bot that he programmed for personal use, and we later see him looking at a pinup he made as a sexy visual gag.
To deny our own impulses is to deny the very thing that makes us human.
This line is relevant to LGBT people of every stripe. The woman in the red dress, played by Fiona Johnson, is fundamentally an element of sexual objectification. She serves no other purpose other than to look sexy, framed in the POV shot of a straight man, like literal male gaze, and then is the subject of guy talk that Mouse tries to start with Neo. Yet, it's not really that bad. She's traditionally attractive in a realistic way, which makes the twist that much more jarring, and makes the narrative sexual, but ultimately wholesome, similar to Trinity delivering the call to adventure. It's probably the best way to portray straight male sexuality, Mouse having found an undisruptive outlet for his sexual desires. It's also not actually the male gaze, even though we all thought it was when it came out. The Wachowskis are into women as women, so it's a sapphic gaze that is fundamentally different from, say, Frank Miller and his infamous ass shot. Also, it is interesting that a woman defined by her femininity transforms into a man, isn't it? The script has a scene that was ultimately cut. Neo asks why Morpheus thinks he's the one. Morpheus says that after so much time searching to find the one, he gave up. And then he saw Neo and instantly knew. The way he describes it sounds like love at first sight. In the deeper meaning, Morpheus may be in love with Neo. It's a theme in common with the trans-coded character in Assassins.
Why can't you two just kiss and make up?
Morpheus and Trinity take Neo to a spiritual guide called the Oracle, played by Gloria Foster, to help him learn if he is the one. The One is a reincarnating hero figure, similar to the Dalai Lama, and there are several children present as other candidates for being the One, to make him feel awkward with his relatively old age. Neo speaks to a young boy with Uri Geller powers, who gives him the trick for how to break rules in the Matrix. To understand that physical objects don't really exist, and instead change his perception of the illusion.
Then you'll see that it is not the spoon that bends, it is only yourself.
It's interesting wording. The concept of bending is associated with being gay, as it's literally not straight, and the rhyming phrase gender bender is about playing with expressions of gender. Neo bends his body, and the spoon appears to bend with him. The reflection motif is used again, as Neo considers who he is, or trans Neo considers who she is.
Whoa.
The Oracle is kind of a grandmotherly therapist. Also, as we'll learn in the sequels, a benign program. Neo's visit with her is similar to someone questioning their gender identity, reaching out to an experienced older queer person to see if they can tell if they are trans. The advisor can talk it over with them or speculate, but the only real answer is for them to examine themselves and learn who they are. The Oracle directs Neo's attention to a sign with the Latin for know thyself, and basically says that knowing he's the one would be as obvious as falling in love. In the deeper meaning, this is likely in reference to gender euphoria, the sense of great happiness that trans people feel when they achieve their desired role in some form. Neo doubts that he is the one, and she says that he isn't as a form of manipulation, presumably so that he could realize it on his own.
The Matrix cannot tell you who you are.
She tells him a prophecy. Morpheus' life will be put in danger by his devotion to protect Neo. Neo will have a choice: save Morpheus and die, or save himself and let Morpheus die. She stresses that the Resistance needs Morpheus, making it clear that he should choose to save Morpheus if he wants to be a moral person. As a black woman, the Oracle falls into a problematic role of subordinate motherly advisor, especially to a character widely perceived as white. It's kind of a mammy caricature, mixed with the magical force of nature stereotypical role like Morgan Freeman as God and Bruce Almighty. It would be less problematic with Will Smith, but still uncomfortably similar to the old racist tropes. Meanwhile, Cypher goes the way of Judas, or possibly a detransitioner, and sells out his friends to Agent Smith in exchange for a pleasant life in the Matrix, his memories of the truth wiped from his mind, and to be reprogrammed as a famous actor. Agent Smith ignores his chosen name as Cypher, and dead names him as Mr. Reagan. This is probably a reference to Ronald Reagan, the movie star turned president, who committed a grave disservice against the LGBT community by deliberately not addressing the HIV/AIDS crisis for 5 years, until it started to affect the cishet population. Though the main demographic of AIDS sufferers is commonly associated with gay men, AIDS disproportionately killed trans women of color, many of whom were registered as men who have sex with men by the transphobic medical establishment.
Whoa.
The agents blow away Mouse, who dies in real life because his mind makes it real, And then Cypher attacks the rebels in the real world, killing Dozer, APOC, and Switch before Tank can take him out. He also acts rapey towards Trinity and hassles her about being interested in Neo and not him, making him kind of a proto-Elliot Rodger type. Good for a slimy Judas villain, and of decent feminist value. It's again ironic that the incel community would co-opt the red pill imagery, given how the film actually depicts people like them. Also, he describes Neo as having pretty eyes. An interestingly feminine description.
Look into his eyes. Those big, pretty eyes.
Morpheus gives himself up to Smith to save Neo. However, Morpheus knows codes that could give the machines entry to Zion, the human's last stronghold, so Tank prepares to kill him. Neo recognizes this as the point where he can sacrifice himself to save Morpheus, and thus humanity, so he decides to play Jesus and go in and rescue him. Trinity insists that she come as well, acting pretty badass as she does so, saying that she outranks him, and basically orders him to let her go with him. It's a decently feminist moment. Cue the gun rack scene. Good thing she stepped out of the way. While torturing Morpheus, Agent Smith gives a bad guy speech about considering humanity a type of virus that needs to be exterminated. Aside from being ironic that he ends up becoming a computer virus himself, there's a deeper meaning that can be read from it about the pathologizing of LGBT identities. Homosexuality was officially considered a mental illness in the United States until 1973. It was even worse with transsexuality, which was framed as a mental illness in itself, until the DSM-5 redefined it in as late as 2013 to emphasize the state of unwellness having the wrong morphology, not for a disorderly condition of wanting to change said morphology. As recently as 2018, transphobes got a paper published by the Public Library of Science journal, PLOS1, that asserts that the education of transgender identity, causing people to subsequently identify as transgender, ought to be considered a social contagion, pathologized under the label of rapid onset gender dysphoria. PLOS1 has since disavowed this study. Agent Smith is effectively the personification of the bigot wanting to wipe out queer people.
You are a plague, and we are the cure.
Also, while it may not have been intentional on the part of the Wachowskis, the whole thing with white agents harassing a black man does come across as meaningful in the final version. Neo and Trinity launch their attack on the building, guns a-blazing, as they massacre security forces. There is an obvious problem with the dynamic where the good guys are massacring innocent people. The agent training program is used to justify it, where the innocents are set up as people that they want to protect in the larger picture, but who are each potential agents, and thus disposable on an individual level. It's really just an excuse to have a big cheesy action scene, but the framing doesn't adequately address the issue of what should be considered a tragedy, where they must murder innocents to save the human resistance. However, within the context of the cheesy action scene, I like that Trinity participates to the extent that she does, getting to be an action hero alongside the male lead, and leaving the scene right at his side, repeating the lesson that
there is no spoon.
Neo does a fun stunt that deposits him and Trinity at the roof, while causing enough structural damage to annoy the agents. In the middle of another cheesy action scene, an enemy transforms into an agent. Neo fires on him, but he moves all over the place at supersonic speeds, and not a bullet hits him. Then he fires on Neo, who, in the heat of the moment, does something similar. A freaky backwards limbo bend that dodges bullets at supersonic speeds, something that no human has ever done, to Trinity's knowledge. It's not perfect, he gets grazed and falls over, but it's something. The exact way that he bends is iconic, but not explained past it being a lesser version of the bullet-dodging maneuver of the agent. I would speculate that it's an effect of him taking Spoon Boy's advice, yes, that is the boy with the spoon's official credit, and bending himself like the spoon appears to bend. If we go with the idea that the spoon bending is a metaphor for being queer, then Neo's limbo bend uses being queer to subvert the aggression of the oppressive authority. Neo is made vulnerable, the agent goes to kill him, and Trinity puts a bullet in his head with a great one-liner.
Dodge this.
But the agent is beyond such things as death. The body changes back to the human's form. The agent's consciousness is simply elsewhere for now. Nevertheless, the moment was badass. Trinity is accepted by the framing as a fun action hero, and she just rescued the male protagonist. It's a feminist moment in itself. Now knowing that they can at least kill agents as host bodies, they steal a helicopter and take the fight to the agents. Shooting up everything in the room except Morpheus somehow? Whatever. Rule of cool. The agents' bodies are killed, and they reconstitute by taking over other soldiers' bodies, and have to physically return to the room. Neo calls to Morpheus and gets him to find the strength to break his chains and jump to the helicopter just as the agents return. Morpheus is shot and only makes it halfway, so Neo tethers himself and jumps to meet him, just barely saving him. Then you've got this great stunt where Trinity is flying the helicopter that holds Neo, who holds Morpheus. And, of course, an agent fires on the chopper, forcing Trinity to find a way to gently set them down on far-off rooftops before she crashes. It's a great scene, and without the awkward dynamic where you're technically cheering on the murder of innocents. However, things are a little problematic, with the black guy being put in the subordinate damsel in distress position to be rescued by heroes who everyone considers to be white. There's just no getting around that. That said, with that flawed starting point, it's probably the best execution that could be done. Morpheus' rescue is a team effort. Neo and Trinity take out bad guys together, and then to a reasonable degree, Morpheus must save himself, breaking his chains. An obvious abolition metaphor that every other subversive movement has co-opted, working on both the racial and queer levels, and then the three of them work together in the daisy chain. More than just progressive, it's well written! Trinity drops Neo off long enough for him to untether himself, as she prepares to sacrifice herself to save him, as he is prepared to save Morpheus. But he elects to save her against the odds. She allows Neo to save her by disconnecting the tether in a certain way, so that he would hold on to her and not be dragged down by the helicopter. It isn't just a case of the male lead saving the female lead. She saves him and then takes deliberate action to allow him to save her. That is a great cooperative dynamic. Then the helicopter crashes into a building. Wow, they were so lucky this came out when it did. And Neo warps reality to protect her in a way that should be impossible. The three of them have a profound reunion as man-in-the-chair Tank watches in awe. Neo is the one. In the deeper meaning, that awe of recognition may be a metaphor for gender euphoria. Instead of the wearing tension and general unease and depression of gender dysphoria, gender euphoria is the state of happiness that comes from congruity with one's gender identity instead of dissonance. It's the light at the end of the tunnel. Speaking of tunnels, Tank creates an exit for them in the subway. Neo sends Trinity and Morpheus back first, and a homeless man witnesses something that should be impossible, and Agent Smith flags that matrix data and takes over his body. He fires on Trinity, missing but taking out the exit. He rounds on Neo.
Mr. Anderson.
Along with Morpheus' red pill speech and
there is no spoon,
Smith's surreal emphasis of Mr. Anderson is one of the more iconic quotes. It illustrates the thematic importance of getting to name yourself and claim your identity. If Neo were played by Will Smith, I'm sure that comparisons would be drawn to Malcolm X, who erased the slaver's name that was forced on his enslaved ancestors, and instead replaced it with X. Smith as the antagonistic white cop-like character, emphasizing Anderson, would effectively be antagonizing Black Neo with his slave name. For what it's worth, Lana Wachowski has compared her overt trans appearance to Malcolm X's happily black appearance, not even wanting to pass as cisgender, the way Malcolm X would not want to pass as white. As it is, this scene has been compared to dead naming, especially with the drawn-out Mr. Neo considers running, but he now believes that he is the one. Or trans Neo truly believes in her gender identity. And this gives Neo the strength to stand up to this figurehead of the oppressive institution. They square off like opponents in a western. and launch at each other, now equally matched. Stop. Bullet time. Neo gets so confident that he enters the position of attacker, while Smith defends, even managing to break his sunglasses. However, Smith gains the upper hand, beats Neo to a pulp, and holds him in the path of a fast-approaching subway train. He gives a bad guy speech about how Neo can't choose his fate, calling him Mr. Anderson.
My name is Neo.
Aside from the obvious transgender-related significance, the scene plays similarly to a personal story that Lana Wachowski has described about considering suicide by stepping in front of a train.
I was very used to traveling home quite late because of the theater. I know the train platform will be empty at night because it always is. I let the B train go by because I know the A train will be next and it doesn't stop. When I see the headlight, I take off my backpack and I put it on the bench. It has the note in front of it. I try not to think of anything but jumping as the train comes. Just as the platform starts to rumble, suddenly I notice someone walking down the ramp. It is a skinny older man wearing overly large 1970s square style glasses that remind me of the ones my grandma wears. He stares at me the way animals stare at each other. I don't know why he wouldn't look away. All I know is that because he didn't, I am still here.
Agent Smith survives the attack, and Neo runs away. He steals a phone and gets Tank to direct him to room 303 and exit, but he's got agents on his tail. He runs through a building, disturbs a couple of old women, and one turns into an agent in another transgender transformation. Considering that the woman in red is a deliberate trap in a simulation, it's the first real transgender agent transformation. We will see another in The Matrix Reloaded, not to mention Smith's viral assimilation of the Oracle in The Matrix Revolutions. Meanwhile, in the real world, the machines locate the Nebuchadnezzar and send Sentinel drones to attack. Morpheus prepares an EMP weapon that will kill the machines, and Neo if he's still in the Matrix when it goes off, but he has faith that Neo can return in time. Even when the Sentinels break in, he refuses to activate it until Neo is safely out. However, Agent Smith works out where Neo is going and ambushes him, shooting him several times in the chest. He flatlines in the real world, and the agents confirm he's dead in the Matrix. Despite his apparent death, Trinity gives him a pep talk, confessing her love and kissing him, and he revives. This is an obvious Jesus metaphor. Trinity is associated with the Holy Spirit as the one to give him life. There is also a queer fairy tale level of meaning, where Neo assumes a feminine role as the Snow White or Sleeping Beauty archetype, while Trinity assumes a masculine role as the heroic prince. The two of them are delightfully androgynous. Neo stands, the agents fire on him, but he has full access to his one powers. He freezes the bullets and lets them drop. Their weapons have no power over him. Agent Smith attacks him physically, but he blocks every blow. He doesn't even have to try anymore. He dives into Smith's body, now the one to give him the body horror, and blows him up. The remaining agents take this in, and then run. Neo can effectively subvert the oppressive institution and make it afraid. He lets them go, and exits in the nick of time, just as the EMP goes off. The day is saved, and he and Trinity share a romantic moment. The word trans shows up on screen again as Neo contacts the machines directly from a payphone in the Matrix. The machines try to trace the call, as they do in the beginning, but Neo blocks it this time. They are no longer in control. He delivers a message to the machines, or to the viewer, or to the real-world institution. The message is simple. Change is coming. The Resistance is going to make a new world without rules or boundaries. You can't stop it, but you can choose how you handle it. Essentially, he offers them a conditional peace. They can accept human freedom, or face the consequences of refusal. The ball is in their court. This sets up the ending of the trilogy, where Neo ultimately forges a peace with the machines. A lot of moviegoers didn't like the ending of Matrix Revolutions, or going back on the theme of the defeat of evil they thought that the films were going for, but I think it was all set up here. The machines have as much of a right to exist as do the humans, And the cishet people have their own right to be counted in society as much as the queer people, the white people as much as the people of color. But the thing we're insisting on is the end of oppression. Remember, Neo lets the other agents go. He's better than Agent Smith for not giving in to hatred, which is something that even the other agents find weird. Watching the film now, knowing that it's a metaphor for being trans, I can feel a strange energy in Neo's words. It's the same as with T'Challa's speech at the end of Black Panther. This is a powerful, subversive film. He hangs up and flies away like Superman. He has broken all the rules and has ascended. Now, anything might happen. And so concludes The Matrix. This is an amazing film. Some of its cheesiness hasn't aged well, but for the most part, it holds up. With the fourth Matrix film on the horizon, and Lily Wachowski confirming the trans themes, the Matrix fandom is being revitalized. It's a good time for people to learn to appreciate its progressive themes, in addition to its awesome action scenes and mind-bending premise. Trinity is a great female action star, and is treated in a feminist way. Interacting with Neo on a very equal level, the rescue of Morpheus demonstrates the Wachowskis' commitment to showing her as a team player who participates just as much as the boys. She even gets a few positive demonstrations of power over a character symbolic of Jesus, and the androgyny is a queer positive element. Without even getting into the subtext of Neo as a metaphor for a trans woman, he demonstrates decent feminist values, being able to accept Trinity as a competent woman after his initial blunder, and accepting a subordinate role when Trinity asserts her authority. The character's own androgyny is queer positive and generally feminist. And then you get into the fact that he is a metaphor for a trans woman, and the character becomes that much more progressive. Morpheus is also an interesting character insofar as his possible queer coding goes. If I'm right to consider him subtextually in love with Neo, then the three of them could represent a polycule. I also get that vibe from the two leads in Male Friend and Assassins. Just saying. The racial politics are generally progressive and work well with the subversive theme. The Nebuchadnezzar crew is pretty racially diverse, and Neo, as played by Keanu Reeves, is essentially a man of color fighting the system of oppression, represented by white cop-looking characters. Notably, all the literal human cops in their service are also white. The Wachowskis don't even toss in a few token black cops to be killed off, as is the standard in Hollywood. It is strictly about Neo fighting white guys. When he takes the red pill and becomes aware that they oppress humanity, it's a decent metaphor for a person of color becoming woke. That said, it really would have been better if Neo were played by Will Smith and Morpheus were played by Val Kilmer or Sean Connery. Even though I can't imagine Kilmer or Connery would do half as good a job as Lawrence Fishburne, there are problems introduced by making the subordinate male friend character a black guy and making the male lead a man who passes for white and is largely perceived as white. Basically, no one thinks of Neo as Asian. They think of him as a white guy. In the standard blockbuster film framing, unlike the framing of Always Be My Maybe, I think Keanu Reeves is a problematic choice. In the public consciousness, a white guy turns out to be Jesus and saves the world, including the black friend, rendered subordinate by the narrative structure. It turns into a movie as racially problematic as any other Hollywood movie. And then there's the thing where misogynists co-opted the red pill metaphor. It is a massive misunderstanding of the film's core themes, but it was enabled by the general ambiguity of the message. It's something that I personally consider a narrative strength, that the film isn't overt in its message against the white cis-hetero capitalist establishment, and just allows itself to have deeper thematic meaning as the struggle against the machines plays out. But on a practical level, it's problematic because anyone can bring their own personal struggle to it and have it generally work, even if they're misogynists, even if they're white supremacists. A film like the 2019 remake of Black Christmas, that is so overt in its progressive themes, will turn off anyone who doesn't agree with it, and guarantee that no bigoted movement will co-opt it for their own twisted agenda. Despite my own personal taste, I have to say that this is a stronger kind of progressive film. Here's hoping that The Matrix 4, now directed by an out transgender woman, will be more overt in its message.
I was born to reign!
Please like, share, subscribe, and consider donating to my Patreon. Pledges of $2 or more will earn you an explicit thank you at the end of each video. Thank you.